had a request a number of weeks ago from a follower to do some leech patterns. So I'm going to do about 4 leech patterns over the next few weeks, but I'm going to start out with this basic mohair leech. It's probably one of the simplest and easiest flies that you can ever tie because it's just the marabou tail and the mohair yarn and some lead along the hook shank. Leech patterns are wonderful patterns if you haven't fished any for all kinds of different cold water and warm water species. You can tie these on different styles of hooks. If you want a short shanked hook and a longer tail, you can do that as well. This is going to be tied on a standard streamer hook. This is the basic mohair leech, and I'll go ahead and get started. To start our mohair leech, I'll put the hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 9672. It's a 4X long streamer hook. I'll debarb that. Before I attach the thread, I'm actually going to attach some lead wraps. This just gives the fly a little bit more weight. You could, if you didn't want to do lead wraps, you could do, say, a bead head or something like that. I've got some .030 lead-free wire. You could use a little bit less or a little bit heavier if you want. You can put more wraps or less wraps. I'm putting about 12 wraps. That's up to you. Remember, more wraps is going to add more weight, but at the same time, if you're going down in the size of the lead, in order to achieve the same sink rate in the water, you might have to put more wraps. I'll smooth that out and then kind of squish all that lead together, and I want to have it a little bit forward on the hook shank, not exactly behind the eye, but just a little forward of center. Now I'm going to attach my thread. For thread, I'm just using a Uni-80 in olive. Attach my thread behind the eye of the hook, wrapping back to the lead. Now at this point, I'm going to loosen up my tension on my thread as I reach and wrap back over those thread wraps to get to the back end. And the reason for that is if I kept wrapping right up in the front here to build up a thread dam, it's actually going to start pushing this lead down along the hook shank. By getting to the back here, I can put in a little bit of a thread dam to hold that in place, then come back up to the front. The thread dam in the front does help keep the lead in its position, but this is mostly to allow for a nice smooth transition when I'm attaching the mohair yarn to the hook shank. I don't want an abrupt ledge or a little abrupt drop off here where the mohair wraps down and some of my lead is exposed. So I want to put in a decent thread dam that is more of a transition. Because I'm using lead free, I don't have to worry about covering all of that up. I'm not going to put a pronounced thread dam in the back because the marabou tail I'm going to wrap right up to the lead and fill this space in to give myself a nice even diameter on the back side of the fly. So this mohair leech is going to be an olive color. You can choose, there's different colors of mohair yarn that you can get. I'm going to use some olive. It's kind of a light olive marabou for the tail. I want the tail to be about a hook length long. You could go a little shorter if you want. It doesn't have to be super full. That's one nice thing. You don't really want this to be a really, really full tail as much as it's just, you want it to flow in the back so that it just has some undulating movement. I'm going to wrap forward along the hook shank, wrapping that Marabou down just shy of those thread wraps there, because when I cut this, now if I wrap forward, it just fills that space in. I get a little bit more of a wider diameter here, so as I'm wrapping, this area right here doesn't present a problem. Of course, you can also add in some thread wraps to try and smooth that transition off a little bit. And then we'll bring our thread back to the end of the body. This is where the Mohair Leech gets its name. I'm using a Uni-Mohair. All this is just a stringy mohair yarn. And what we're going to do is wrap this in like any other kind of chenille, and then stroke all of these fibers out as we're wrapping that in, and then brush all of that out. So you'll want probably about anywhere from 6 to 10 inch piece. We'll take one end of that, tie that in. This is a kind of a sloppy, messy fly in that regard. It's not sloppy in its construction as much as its overall presentation. So don't worry if you got a lot of these fibers that are kind of sticking out and running all over the place. I like to, I don't know if you can see this, I'll try and run this by, but most of this mohair, because of the way it's wrapped in, is kind of flattened down to the core yarn inside there. So prior to wrapping this on, I like to stroke a lot of these down before I start wrapping these in. I just don't want these wrapped in all bunched along the yarn. I want them out so that when this is wrapped in as the body, all this sparse mohair is actually going to be what makes up the bulk of our body. So you just keep wrapping this in and stroking those fibers down and back. And we'll wrap this in. Like I said, it's not going to look pretty as we get this wrapped in, and you might even have some areas where there's gaps where there's not a whole lot of mohair. But you'll see it'll all come out in the end. Get to the eye of the hook, secure that in with 2 or 3 wraps, trim away the excess, sweep anything back, and then just make a small head behind the eye of the hook. About a 5-turn whip finish. Now you probably noticed that my thread snapped as I was putting tension on that whip finish. That happens occasionally. Sometimes the whip finish knot is just fine, but other times like this, it's starting to unravel. So I'm going to reattach my thread. and put in another whip finish. This time not pulling so tight. There you go. A couple drops of head cement on the side of that. Soak down in there. Help to secure that a little bit. Now we get to finish the rest of the body on this. I'm going to take my dubbing needle, kind of run it through the tail. What you find is as you're wrapping that mohair on, some of these fine fibers will actually wrap around the tail and kind of bind it up. So we want to get those out first. Take a brush. Old toothbrush will work good for this too. Now I'm brushing forward, and the reason is I'm just trying to get all of these fibers kind of spread out on their own a little bit, not clumped together. You can see some places they're a little more clumped than others. You just pick these out. Gets anything trapped out of there. And then start brushing them back the other way. And all you're really trying to do is get all of these mohair fibers out along the body in kind of a torpedo shape, in a lateral shape right here. I will kind of stroke all these fibers back. And where I get to the tail right here with all of these extra fibers, I don't really want all of these out here, because what that will do is it will restrict the movements of the tail. So I'm going to pinch these down just past the tail. Often I can bring this up, tease the tail out, most of the tail out like this. And then I'm going to trim these fibers so they're just a little shy of the tail. That's going to help them to not interfere with that marabou in the back and its action in the water. So the whole thing will kind of flow and undulate. You get any of these that are real long back here, you can trim those out if you want. Experiment a little bit. You might find that you like that a little bit longer. I don't worry about these that are kind of sticking out this way or even this way. I'm trimming them just to show you, but I generally don't worry about those, because as this is in the water, it's all going to kind of lay down and a little bit, and it's going to look a little sleeker like this, but it's all going to flow and have a lot of movement in the water. So there's your basic mohair leech. You can get the mohair in all kinds of different colors. I like olives and browns and blacks, basically your leech kind of colors. But you can get this mohair in red, so it's kind of like a red worm or something like that. Really just a very, very simple, easy, basic fly to tie. As you can see, you don't even have to add the lead, so you put in a tail, wrap your mohair, brush it around, and you're done. It's a very, very simple, basic, easy pattern. That's the Mohair Leech. Thanks for joining me at Devise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.